Are you ready on your end?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right.
I got my
Well,
coffee.
welcome. You're all coffeeed up and ready to go.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. February 9th, winter session, Deal Doctors. We're going to be reviewing how to avoid post-possession problems. And this is always an interesting gray area. So I'm assuming that when I look out here to our agents, post-possession problems is a real problem in certain geographic areas of where we practice real estate. Now, there are some areas that practice real estate where the buyers will take possession at day of closing. And there are other areas that have a 30-day post possession. I know Grand Rapids areas, that tends to be a common standard for that practice. But we see that throughout the state of Michigan. In certain areas, people need 7 days to move out, or 14 days, or 30 days. So I don't know if anyone has the ability to, on here, react or raise your hand of how many of you had a recent post-possession issue or concern, so we can kind of see maybe, I don't know, there's a little react button at the bottom. If you click on it, you can do like a thumbs up. Um, I just want to kind of see how many people out there have had a recent post-possession problem, or maybe all of you and your clients are phenomenal and there are no issues. All right, we got Chris who's got a hand up. So no post-possession problems. Well, this is great then, if that's truly the case. All right, we got Megan. Thank you, Megan. Uh, oh, we got some others. All right. Well, we're going to try to talk about how to solidify language within your addendum to prevent or try to minimize risk associated with your buyer moving into a post-possession home. Now, it's very important that anytime you are writing a purchase agreement, or maybe you've reached out to the listing agent and they have said, hey, we need 30 days post possession. So you end up drafting a purchase agreement. You say, okay, we're going to give them 30 days post possession because we want our offer to be strong. We don't want to get rejected. But then in the post possession, we just use 30 days notice. We're going to give them 30 days. Well, who's responsible for what at that point? If we don't truly write some language in that post possession addendum to have a clear understanding between what a seller's intentions are and a buyer's intentions. Now, Don, you've always said that if it's not in writing, what?
Doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah.
And and let me say that the post possession issue, um, the key exchange, the first place it starts going wrong is when there's no clarity about when the keys are going to be exchanged, when the property is actually going to be turned over in terms of possession. If you've got 30 days possession after close, when do you start counting? The day of closing or the first full day after? So I always have encouraged agents to clarify before the closing an exact date and time that those keys are going to be turned over. 5 o'clock on February 9, for example, 5 p.m. on February 9, for example, not 30 days after because it's vague. We don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Make it clear before you close when those keys are going to be turned over.
Yeah. And what we would even say further is who's going to be responsible for turning over the keys and where are they going to be providing those keys? So you might say listing agent to surrender keys at 5 p.m. on a certain date at Five Star Real Estate Office or something. So there's an acknowledgement about who's going to be ultimately responsible for the key exchange. Now, do any of the post possession addendums address key exchange? No, no, they don't. Uh, when you look at these post possession addendums, I know West Michigan Regional has one. I know some of the other associations have some post addendum, Michigan Realtor. You have to read that. And I would have to tell you, I'd have to say one statement that those post possession addendums don't address all the concerns that the buyers have. They just don't. They fail, and they fail in a number of ways. One, most of them will say when it comes to a temporary occupancy period, who's going to maintain structure and mechanical systems? Most of these will claim that your buyer will,
But,
right?
but Eric, the seller's still living in the home. What do you mean?
Right. So buyers need to understand that there is a risk. They're not a true landlord, and the seller's not a true tenant. It's kind of this gray area. So you have a buyer who buys a home, but they can't have access to their home. They are not permitted to enter the house. They're not permitted to walk on the property. Uh, they have no rights currently to enter or basically take over that home because of the tenant. Well, again, we can't even really call them a tenant, but for the sake of argument, I'm going to call them a tenant because it makes it easier for us to understand. And the concern is your buyer okay with that? Is it okay that they're going to buy this home, and if something breaks or needs a new roof or HVAC goes out or furnace, that they're going to be responsible for it? Or do they want to update it and say that the seller will maintain the structure and mechanical systems at the property during their time of occupancy? Now, every time we start changing language, it makes it a contention for the seller where the seller might say, well, wait a minute, this other offer says that the buyer is going to do it. So you have to really understand what is your client's risk tolerance with some of these. And the biggest concern I think that we see is not only key exchange, but sewer and water bills. You know how many times we see where someone vacates and all of a sudden a water or sewer bill comes in, it's 300 something dollars, and now the seller's like, well, not my problem. And then we're writing a check just because we don't want to deal with $250 anymore. It's someone arguing over. We're like, okay, here, just take my money. So the post addendum doesn't address sewer and water bills. They should have a final reading. Now, some title companies have gotten smart over the years and they've done a holdback for sewer and water. They'll hold a couple $100 back so that the seller, once they show proof of the final payment of that sewer and water, they'll get that money back. So they have done that, which is a great thing. But again, sewer and water bill should be addressed, and who's going to resolve it? And then the biggest one that we see is, should a buyer ask the seller for a holdback escrow in case the buyer doesn't leave the home in broom clean condition? They don't remove their personal items. Now I have to get a dumpster. I have to clean up dog feces or whatever else garbage that's in that home that someone just threw trash in. They vandalized the property. They swapped out appliances. Does a buyer do an escrow holdback? And that's a big concern. That's the risk of having that conversation in advance to know how much risk is your buyer willing to accept, because they should have an understanding going into a home that it might not be broom clean. There might be crap still there that they need to get a dumpster and throw out. Is $2,000 going to be okay with them? Or maybe they shouldn't even have post possession. That's the things we don't know. Only you can find that out by talking to your client. Now, here's another big concern. Your buyer buys a home. The seller's sitting there, they're living in it. Toilet starts leaking. Who do they call? You think the seller's going to call a plumber? It's not their house. Should they call the landlord or the buyer who now owns the home? Post possession doesn't address any type of leaking or just toilet leaks, smoke detectors, battery goes out. Let's say there is a roof damage. Now I mean, roof damage is a huge one, but again, the buyer has insurance for that, so they're most likely going to have to file a claim. But they're not going to be happy with that because they haven't even got a chance to live in the home yet, and now they're filing a claim. So their homeowner's insurance will be more expensive next year. So there's just so many issues in post possession that need to be talked about before moving forward. Uh, so here's what we've tried to come up with, and I just want to address a couple things because on the West Michigan temporary occupancy agreement for seller after closing, one of the biggest issues when I read some of these is who's going to maintain the structure and mechanical systems of the buyer or seller. And that can be written into the purchase agreement that, hey, in post occupancy, seller is going to maintain all structural and mechanical systems at the property. Key exchange, water, sewer bills, or utilities. They should have final utilities and notification. Maybe the seller should be providing written notification upon them vacating the home. Now, I don't know of anyone that will say, okay, tenant, I'm going to give you post occupancy, but I want you to sign a rental agreement. I want to make this official. I'm going to truly treat you like a tenant. That is an option. Someone could create a lease, but then again, will that seller accept your offer if they all of a sudden see your lease being so egregious towards them? So we're in a catch 22. It would be ideal to have a lease, spelling out all issues and concerns, having a checklist where you can go in at day of closing, take your pictures, run through a checklist with the seller, and then upon the seller vacating, going through again, meeting them, doing a post checklist, making sure there's normal wear and tear and no damage, and then there could be a security deposit and money could be awarded. But
Eric, I'm gonna interrupt.
yeah,
I want to ask Tracy, do we have anybody else on the broker support team other than Tracy here this morning? I'm
I
looking.
think Luigi is here and Kim is here. I think Luigi and I and Kim.
Okay, so broker support team, I'm calling out to you. How many times have we gotten questions in the last 30 days on post-possession issues, whether it's house has seller's debris in it, or they can't the seller isn't going to get out of the house, or any of those things? Would it be more than 10 or less than 10 calls in the last month?
I would say at least 10. You know, EMD is probably our number one thing we talk about, but post-possession issues are common. One thing we didn't talk about was the seller wants to get into their house that they've purchased and closed on while post-possession is happening because they want to measure for carpet. But the seller doesn't want to let them in. They don't have to. Show me where it's written. Does the seller have reasonable, does the buyer should the buyer be giving reasonable access to the home that they bought? Is there anything in post possession about that? We've had some really doozies regarding that.
Okay,
What?
the guys are done, so I'm gonna go.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Louise,
Yes, all kind of, yes, I deal with those kind of issues. And example, one other scenario was where post possession seller will take appliances with them. And it was, even though in contract was to leave them there, verbally they were agreed that the seller will take them with them, but the seller never read the contract properly. Our listing agent never properly explained verbally what's in that contract. Not like the seller was a saint for not reading the contract, but I think it's our agent's responsibility when it comes to stuff like that, appliances, and we should really explain carefully what's what they have to leave and how they have to leave behind and etc. And then even stuff outside, like like leaving, not taking all the stuff with them that they supposed to take, like they have around the shed, or you know post
I,
possession. It is an issue for sure. That
yeah, I've had sellers who decided that they wanted to take their French door, stainless steel refrigerator and swap it out for, the Grandma's Harvest Gold one that was sitting in the basement. There's nothing that precludes them from doing that unless it is stated in the purchase agreement.
yeah.
You have to be really, really clear that all appliances in the home at the time of showing shall remain with the property. I've even seen agents go as far as to take pictures of those appliances and get the seller to sign prior to closing that those are the appliances that are going to remain with the property. Again, it all goes back to getting it in writing. And I want to ask Eric, because Eric drafted something that is really cool. And I want you, Eric, can you share that with the group?
Yeah, give me just a moment here.
While he's working on that, has anyone else had, more stories, issues that we've had, uh, situations with that they can share with the group? Chris, you're muted.
So the most recent one was probably the worst one I've dealt with a couple months ago. It had been on the market. They had a deal fall apart, so we ended up going in and got a pretty good price on the home. But there was a outbuilding or garage that had just a ton of trash in it. There's a ton of trash on the property. Make a long story short, he was supposed to turn over the keys. I believe we gave him 30 days possession. That 30 days came, went up to do a walkthrough the day before, and he was like, well, no, I have another week, or he wasn't on the same page with the day it was supposed to be turned over. Ended up being 7 extra days. We ended up writing an escrow agreement, I believe at the beginning, just to make sure the trash was gone. But in the end, he kept the keys an extra 7 days. The escrow agreement, he did clean most of the trash, but then we had to fight for the remaining trash on the property to be taken care of. In the end, my buyer was finally like, I just want my house. Just give him his escrow money if he gets it cleaned up and be done with it. So it was just a stressful nightmare for a couple weeks.
Chris, you raised a good issue because we have in most contracts what's called tenancy and sufferance, the penalty for staying past the agreed upon post-possession period. And here's the fun thing about tenancy and sufferance. In most cases, the only way that the buyer is ever going to see that money is if they sue for it. So again, this goes back to Eric's question of do we propose creating an escrow, some holdback of funds to ensure that the property is turned over on time, but if it's not, that there's money for the tenancy and sufferance, and to make sure that all the possessions and debris and so on have been removed from the property. Eric, there's your document. Why don't you share that?
You able to see this on the screen?
Yeah, I can.
So just a review real quick. Here is a copy of what the Michigan Regional Temporary Occupancy Agreement for seller after closing. And I highlighted something in yellow here under section 2, and you can see where it says buyer will maintain structure and mechanical systems. So I had a note, do you want the buyer to be required to maintain or place the burden on the seller who's in post-possession? So it's something that really should be addressed, because I think too many times buyers have this this understanding that, hey, I'm not living in the home, so that seller should still be taking care of mechanicals. They're the ones living there. I don't have any control over what's going on site because I'm not living in the home. So maybe the seller should do that. but it's definitely a question that should be addressed. So I'm going to go down to something that I drafted last week, which was this would be an addendum to a purchase agreement. It's really it would review property condition, personal property removal, non-compliance, buyer reimbursement, and escrow holding. Now, there's a lot in this contract. I am currently having an attorney review this to get their attorney opinion. If they give us the go-ahead, I'll end up sharing it with everyone, but I think this would be a way that may help minimize a lot of concerns for our clients and streamline the process. And here's what this contract would do. Here's my thinking. So in section 1, we're just basically saying that the seller is going to vacate the premises and that it's going to be in broom clean condition, free of trash and debris, and personal property that's not included in the purchase agreement would be removed. And at the time that they vacate, I end up spelling out what they're supposed to surrender. So all keys, garage door openers, transmitters, access cards, security card or codes, alarm information. How many times do we forget that to get the current alarm so we can get things transferred over? What if you have a smart nest furnace system? Sometimes you need a code to get in there so you can reprogram it on your app. Well, we forget about those things sometimes, and it makes it very difficult to call them up. You end up having to swap out a thermostat because we can't get access to it. These are things we kind of forget, but I address it here. So what happens? What is the cost of non-compliance? Well, we're asking for buyer reimbursement. Okay, Eric. Well, we always ask for buyer reimbursement. What makes that different? Well, let's walk through it. So, seller shall be solely responsible for all the costs and fees required to bring the property into compliance with this addendum, including but not limited to. So, in this contract, we're truly spelling out what the seller needs to do to perform. And if they don't, how can the buyer get reimbursed? Well, the buyer can get reimbursed for cleaning services, removal or disposal of personal property, locksmith services. You ever get keys that don't work in any doors? I have. I'm like, what the heck is this? Okay. Rekeying or replacement of access devices. It says if buyer incurs any such costs due to seller's failure to comply, the seller shall reimburse buyer in full within 72 hours after receipt of written notice and reasonable documentation. Now, I use the word reasonable because that's what it means, reasonable. You're not going to get a cleaning service and all of a sudden turn around and try to charge $5,000. That might not be reasonable for the market. So keep that in mind. So if the seller fails or refuses to reimburse buyer as required, seller shall additionally be responsible for all reasonable costs of enforcement, including but not limited to court costs, filing fees, attorney fees, small claim court fees, lost wages, and reasonable travel expenses. So this document is really setting this up so that if you ever needed to use it in the courts, it's already been spelled out what you can be reimbursed. It gives a lot more strength and enforcement and reassurance to your buyer that, hey, if the seller doesn't want to play ball, they don't want to do what they want, okay, we'll take care of it. But now we have documentation. We actually have a roadmap now saying what we can collect, which is great. It actually spells it out. And there was a meeting of the minds where both parties agreed to this in advance. So
To Sadie's question real quick, I'm going to jump in here. Yes, we are going to make it available. We have it in front of attorneys now. We're not attorneys, but Eric did a really, really great job of building a document that we have in front of the attorneys to see if they can add any additional language. When we have that, we will be sharing it with all of our agents.
So here's a section, optional escrow holdback. Now, I don't know whether the language should still read post, if it's post vacancy or Post occupancy. There's a difference. Post occupancy is someone still living in the home. Post vacancy is once that seller has vacated the home. So I believe I have the language correct here, but again, this is something that these are nuances of contract law. So this is optional. This is where you could still use this form, but now we're going to ask the seller, hey, look, I'm going to give you post occupancy, but I want to elect to have escrow held. So in case you don't perform, I'm going to take the escrow money. So this is where you would elect to have escrow money withheld, or you just say, hey, look, we're not going to ask for any escrow, but we still have documentation that says if the seller doesn't broom clean, pick up trash, I can now sue for lost wages and everything else. Time, and it's a much stronger court case. So let's say we elected an escrow. Great. If escrow holdback is elected, at the closing, the sum of blank dollars would be withheld from the seller proceeds and deposited with blank. Now we have who's going to hold the funds. Now, if it's 5-star, if we decide to go down the path, it would make it very easy for us to look at this and say, okay, yep, here's reasonable documentation that the seller failed to perform. We're going to release the funds. It's going to be a unilateral release of funds to your buyer. No more small claims, no more garbage that we have to deal with, right? We can streamline the process, or even a title company. But there's a caveat here. So before I speak on behalf of title companies or attorneys who are holding escrow, let's go a little further. And also, this escrow holdback shall be released to the seller within 7 days after seller vacates the property, provided the buyer has not delivered written notice of non-compliance. So there's a time frame that we would have to follow. But here's non-performance. So here's where we get into a concern. Escrow law typically oversees or supersedes purchase agreement law in our contracts. And anytime you have an escrow company holding funds, they don't care what's written on that purchase agreement. You could write in there that this escrow is going to be non-refundable. They don't care. They have to follow their guidelines and their licensing law for escrow holders to always remain a neutral party. They cannot make a determination on the buyer or seller who gets the EMD. And the only way they will ever release funds is when both parties can come together in writing and agree to release the funds. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to circumvent that law to see whether we can streamline the process. I don't know yet, but I think we can. And here's how. So escrow holder authority, seller non-performance in Michigan law. I have here written that the escrow holdback shall be held, administered, and dispersed pursuant to this addendum and the laws of the state of Michigan. Great, pretty straightforward. Upon receipt of written notice from the buyer, together with reasonable documentation evidencing seller's non-performance and buyer's incurred costs, the escrow holder may disperse from the escrow holdback the amount reasonably necessary to reimburse buyer. Any remaining balance shall be released to the seller. Pretty straightforward. What we're saying is a buyer is going to now submit documentation of service cleanup fees, personal, dumpster costs, whatever. The escrow holder can take a look at that, agree with it because it's reasonable documentation, and then disperse the funds for the buyer to be reimbursed, and any remaining can go to the seller. Now, here's the legal challenge or caveat that I'm asking attorneys to see if there's any Michigan statute law or court cases or pending, is that it comes down to what can and can't the escrow holder do. So the language down here is that the escrow holder shall have no duty to investigate or adjudicate disputes and may rely in good faith on the written notice and documentation provided. I love the terms no duty to investigate or adjudicate disputes or good faith. It means that a reasonable person who would look at the evidence from a buyer would say, yes, these are reasonable expenses for services, for cleaning, for dumpsters, for removal of property, for rekeying a home, for sewer and water bills, for anything else. Further on here, that this addendum shall be deemed authorized by the parties and compliant with Michigan law. I'm going to throw my hands up here because I don't know whether two parties, a buyer and seller, can remove their ability for a dispute in advance. I don't know whether a buyer and seller can automatically waive their right to a dispute in advance. So that's where the court challenge is, and this is where I'm diving down. If we can, and if both parties can agree, which I don't see why they can't in advance, but we're going to find out, we should be able to streamline this process and limit these types of small issues after the fact. Now, if both parties still dispute it in writing, then we go back to the same old way of, okay, small claims court is the only way. But we're going to see whether we can push this one through. Now, escrow holders, like title companies or attorneys, are going to balk at this form. I already know that. They're not going to like this form because they don't want to be put in the middle as to make a determination, even though buyer and seller are saying, yes, go ahead, title company, make a determination. They probably will fight me on that. And this is why I gave up. This is why I put up another optional escrow holder. This is a protection clause more for the title company or the attorneys. This protection clause allows them to say, well, okay, I agree that we have the power to make a unilateral decision and disperse funds to a buyer, but we still want to have the right to say no. And this is what this does. This gives them a right that the escrow holder protection has been elected. And this will say that if the escrow holder receives conflicting written demands or determines in good faith that a bona fide dispute exists regarding disbursements, the escrow holder may, without liability, retain the escrow funds pending joint written instructions, disperse the funds according to a court order, small claims, or they can interplead the funds, which is what this is how they currently practice. But I'm trying to get more of a loop around this. If Five Star or a title company that you have confidence in would be okay making a determination in good faith and with reasonable documentation. So that's where we sit with this document. It does survive closing and delivery of possession. Buyer and seller can sign it. I think it's a good start. I think it's a draft that needs to be discussed further, but at least I think it's a start where we can have a conversation with title companies, attorneys, escrow holders, Five Star, and any other company out there, because we want to try to streamline this. We're really tired of small claims courts behind the scenes and agents being stuck in the middle going, well, I can't help you. I can't do anything. Well, I want this off my plate. I want to have someone who can stand up and say, yes, seller, you're an idiot. You did this. You failed to perform. You agreed that you would make this right. Now do the right thing. And now we're going to compel you to do the right thing.
Yeah.
So
I
that was
think
the
one of
whole
the things that, Eric, one
process.
of the things that you raise is the question of can you or should you give up your rights before there's a reason to do that? And that's always the question of why would we have our clients, whether it's seller or buyer, basically give up their rights before there's a reason to do that. And that's why we're looking to attorneys to fine tune this. And it's going to be a process, so it's not something we're going to turn out and make available tomorrow. But we're working on it. And I think when it's done, it's going to be pretty comprehensive. I want to ask a question. Here's one for you, Eric or Tracy or anyone. Okay. So the seller has let's say 30 days possession after closing. On the 27th day, they give their keys to the listing agent because they're going to move out of state or wherever they're going. The listing agent gives the keys on to the buyer's agent. what is the buyer's agent's responsibility at that moment?
Well, if you look back to the purchase agreement, one, the key should have probably not been exchanged yet until there was something in writing stating that, hey, we're vacating early. You now have the right to the property, because ultimately, in my opinion, and again, I would have to defer to an attorney, but I'm assuming that this buyer agent now has a set of keys that they can't do anything with, and they have to wait to hand them over once the occupancy period is done.
Guess what?
So it puts them in a bad position to have keys to
Guess,
something.
guess what? The attorney says the moment that that buyer agent got the keys in their hand, that was
Notice.
implied notice that they were turning over the keys or turning over possession, and that buyer's agent had a responsibility to turn those over to the buyer's agent
Mhm.
or to the buyer.
We use a
Well, see,
key
And this is why I
exchange.
don't answer right away. I refer to an attorney first.
Well, I only know the answer to that one because it was my client. It was my buyer. And when I got the keys, the listing agent was not supposed to turn them over until the 30th day, but he was busy doing something and got distracted or whatever, and came by my office and dropped off the keys. And I asked our attorney, what do I do with this? And he said, you have to turn them over to the buyer. That's
You
your
know,
job.
I think I recall that a case like this coming up maybe about 7 years ago, Don, with Gail Anderson of
Maybe,
surrender of keys.
possibly.
I'm having a flashback.
So
Yeah,
what,
I like using a key exchange form because it makes it clear the possession is really between the buyer and the seller to begin with. So I like a key exchange form that makes it abundantly clear that the seller surrendered the keys on X day, especially because a lot of times you have pity. They're paying a daily fee to be in that house for every day. So it's abundantly clear that on X day the keys were surrendered so the seller stops paying rent.
yeah, I totally agree. I think that when do you have the key exchange signed?
The minute my buyer tells me, the minute the seller tells me that he's vacating the house, I already have it prepped and in my dot loop. And really, sometimes it's just a matter of hitting send because I've already got it ready to go. So as soon as I know they're out, we have it signed and sent over to the buyer side. The minute we give them notice, or we can see they open it in dot loop, we're done.
Yeah, and it's also important to have some type of notice from a seller. If you are on the opposite side of post possession, you represent the seller. You definitely want to give notice because the buyer is going to need to get the utilities transferred over into their name. Your client doesn't want to keep paying for utilities. So the more notice that they can give, the better. I mean, maybe they're going to give a 5 day window or 7 days that, hey, we'll be out by this day, but it's nice to have that transfer and it works smoothly. Not everyone racing at the last minute. Oh, it's 9 o'clock. But by the way, we vacated and we turned off the utilities. Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
utility
what happens?
transfers should be very important because the
So,
seller is under no obligation. They can just terminate. They
so
don't care.
what happens, Eric, if the seller decides it's the dead of winter and they're going to move out? They're supposed to have 30 days possession. They don't notify anyone that they have moved out on the third day of possession. It's below 0 temps and the propane runs out.
Yeah, that would be an attorney, but I would have to say, based on the post possession, I would have to imagine that that would be misuse, abuse, or neglect of the property, and they would be lawfully responsible for any and all repairs associated with that. This is my non-attorney opinion, but we would have to get a real attorney. I just play one. I pretend to be one.
Well, again, that's actually something that happened with one of my listings. They moved out in the dead of night in the middle of winter, and the water bed that was left there was frozen solid. And needless to say, there was damage to the pipes, and the house was a mess, and it was a huge insurance claim. Thankfully, the buyer had put insurance on the property the day of closing, the day prior to closing. So it was covered, but it was a nightmare. So anybody else got any fun war stories? Because those are always exciting.
So Kim mentioned in another session that she, or maybe it was Tracy, that they have the buyer sign, as of whatever date they looked at it, and then sends that off with the offer letter. How enforceable is that? As far as appliances and things like that.
I think it was probably me that said that, and I used I'll call it the listing ticket, the MLS ticket. And when I send over my offer, I'll oftentimes have the buyer initial as just another way to make it abundantly clear that it did say on this day that the microwave, the refrigerator, the stove, the whatever the things are, it's just another way to memorialize those things that are included in the offer. So they should be included in the purchase agreement, because if it's not written and signed by all parties, it didn't happen. But this is kind of another thing that says on this day, because it's signed in and initialed as well. Just a good practice, a double check system for somebody who's new in real estate. You want to remember these things, because all you need to do is buy one refrigerator, and I promise you, you will never forget again.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric, it's Kim.
Yes.
It's Kim. Hi, everyone.
Kim.
I'm wondering if this is a good time to talk about keys. We get this call quite a bit when the loan has not been funded. And can they share keys? And the buyer wants the keys, and the seller says, "I'm not giving you the keys until I get paid." Is this a good time to address that? We do get that question quite a bit.
Sure. Well, we have gone back and forth on this. So here, let me set up the scenario. You're going to a closing. It's Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. The buyer signs, the seller signs, yet the seller doesn't get the funding wired into their bank account. It's still sitting somewhere, and they're not going to get funded until Monday, is what they're being told. And the question would be, can a buyer give over the keys to the seller? I'm sorry, can the seller give over the keys to the buyer? Or can the seller say, no, this is not your house yet. It hasn't funded. Now, Don, you just experienced this, and it kind of changed our perspective on what things after, two people sign. We used to believe that, no, it wasn't really the buyer's home until it funded. And what'd you learn recently, Don?
Well, I posed this question to my son-in-law, who's actually an attorney, and I said, so here's our premise that we think that the property has not, if the property doesn't fund, it hasn't closed. Therefore, the seller isn't required to turn over possession till they get the money in their pocket. And he said, no, that's not right. I said, okay, well, don't hold back. Tell me what you really think. And his response was that when you have a third party, an escrow agent, if you will, which is the title company, when those funds have been delivered from the buyer to the escrow agent, and the seller has signed their documents and the buyer, you have a closing. You have the money. The escrow agent, it's not like one party is continuing to hold the money. So at that moment, a closing has been performed. It doesn't matter that the seller has not received their funds from a legal perspective. Now, you may get argument from other attorneys because that's an opinion of one attorney, but I think that that's one really strong perspective about it.
And it really makes sense because that, again, that title company or attorney, whoever's holding the escrow funds, they are now a neutral party. So they're gonna perform according to what's been written. And what's been written were all the documents from the title companies, the closing documents, with an understanding from a buyer and seller where the funds are going to go. And again, it's just a timing issue. So
Question.
would I turn over the keys if I'm a seller? Would I recommend it? Yeah, I would. It's not my house anymore.
It's
I'm
also
gonna go
more of a
sell it.
reason.
I'm gonna go
Sorry, go
celebrate.
ahead.
No, I
Yeah,
was gonna
go
say I'm gonna go
celebrate.
celebrate. Be like, woo, not my responsibility anymore.
Well, it's also more of a reason not to do closings at 3 p.m. on a Friday. So that's what I would say to all of you. If you want to eliminate conflict, the best, because a lot of some mortgage companies will have the money funded and waiting at the title company for the closing. Many of them wait for all the documents to get signed, certain ones to get scanned over. You're waiting for somebody behind a desk somewhere to review it, then say, okay, we'll fund it. Then you're waiting for the funding to come. I mean, really, set people up for success. Plan your closings on Wednesdays, which are less busy, and you know the funding, you're going to have time. So, yeah, at 9 o'clock, at 10 o'clock, a 2 o'clock, but certainly not a 3 or 4 o'clock on a Friday.
Yeah,
And
that's a great lesson, Tracy, because I learned a long time ago that I don't do closings on Tuesday or Monday or Friday. I do them Tuesday through Thursday for these kind of reasons. There are too many moving parts that are happening that you don't want to press them up against either side of a weekend. Make sure that prepare for success, as you say.
yeah. Don, may I add something in my opinion?
Sure.
That if the title company is okay to release the documentation to both parties at the close after the closing, I think then it should be safe for keys to be exchanged, even though, because obviously title company will not release documentation if they don't have funds in their account. And I agree what Eric was saying. You know, if they're okay, if they have the funds, I mean, the keys should be released. Absolutely. But the
Yeah.
question arises, let's say we have this stubborn seller,
Mhm.
and they refuse to release the key, and it's weekend, and the buyer had a U-Haul truck waiting to unload with their, out of state. What do we do then? That's when problem becomes a bigger problem.
Yeah, and the only solution really is, somebody's going to end up, buyers and sellers are going to end up in front of somebody in a black robe to reach a solution.
Yeah, would the buyer? This is a silly question. Would the buyer have the right to go in a house and break the locks and technically, legally, is their house if they have signed documentation? Let's say
No,
they cannot
absolutely
go
not.
And the
there.
police won't get involved because it's a civil matter. So the buyer's going to end up being the ones in more trouble. But let's think about the opportunity that each of us have, which is what I was talking about, is we are advice givers. And so as the advice giver to the transaction, have these conversations early with your buyers about all the things that can happen and really about the title company's role that Eric and Don were describing. They have a significant role in this, and they are the neutral party. And that these are the expectations. Talk about these things. Talk about the fact that, you know what, we may close on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, but you might not see the funds in your account till the next morning when you wake up. Number one, because the funds sometimes they go out to an abyss, right? They have to be counted to make sure it's true USD, that it's not fake, that it didn't, so there's steps that need to happen. So I oftentimes tell my buyer, you will not see the money until the next business morning. So be good advice givers.
So back to Louise's question, can the buyer break the locks or go on the property without the seller's permission if the seller is continuing to live there or there's some question even. And the answer is no. We've had situations where buyers have felt that because it's their house, they have a right to show up and measure for flooring or carpets or windows and so on, and they don't. It's just not. The only way that a buyer has a right to get in that property without notice or with short notice to the seller is if there is imminent danger to the property, flooding, fire, the power going off, or any of those kind of things.
And stuff like that can happen, Don, though. Let's say, and I'm just trying to explore, especially when we don't control the seller. Let's say if it's our seller, we have more control, and when we can assure the seller the funds will get to your account if we get assurance from our, let's say, Star Title, that's part is easier. But when we deal with, we represent the buyers, and the sellers are represented by other broker. And stubbornly, again, everyone get the documentation signed, title companies released to both parties, and possession was supposed to be given at the closing. And it's a Friday evening. And now it's a winter. Maybe the utilities are turned off. Who knows what can happen? Furnace can go bad. And, damage can happen. Then what? It's in a sense, it's not fair to the buyer to be held hostage, but just throwing it out there.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. But again, going back to what Tracy says, don't close on Friday.
Yeah, I agree. That's for sure.
I mean, if you have the option, close on Thursday, close on Tuesday, Wednesday. I try to avoid being, butted up against the weekends at all for exactly those kind of reasons. Is it going to happen that you get a stubborn seller who doesn't get their money on Friday afternoon and they hold the money? Absolutely. I've had buyers who had their moving trucks coming in from Colorado on Friday afternoon, and they had to actually put the stuff in storage over the weekend because the seller wouldn't give them possession until they got the funds on Monday. That's their choice. If you have a stubborn seller and a stubborn buyer, well, then they're the ones who are creating the problem. I'm only I'm not a magician. I don't claim to be. So try to communicate on both ends, whether you're working for the buyer or the seller, lay out the possibilities, help them create contingency plans in the event something goes haywire. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you, Eric. That was it's a really good piece. It's a great starting point. And I hope this has helped all of you think carefully about how we handle post-possession after closing issues. And we will share that information, that form that Eric is working on. Wait a minute, I got a chat question, I think maybe here. Before we go. Oh, good stuff. Thanks, Lori. Okay, so we're going to share that information, share that form with you as soon as we get attorney approval on it, and hopefully that will help all of you in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you.